And
There you go. There you go.
it's like 7 o'clock. That's my only excuse.
We have someone in the waiting room.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second Amplifying BIPOC Voices and Sustainability of this year. These events are hosted by interns at the UW-Madison Office of Sustainability. Thank you so much for joining us. The theme of today's event is Indigenous Activism and Sustainability. So first off, we at the Office of Sustainability want to acknowledge the lack of diversity both within our team and our office, which is almost entirely white. This reflects a larger trend across campus and in mainstream environmentalism, in which necessary and valuable BIPOC voices who have long led the fight to protect our communities and environment are excluded. We created this series in an effort to recenter those voices within our campus community. We would also like to take a minute to acknowledge the land we are present on by reading a statement co-written by Ho-Chunk members. So I will read that statement right now. It is: the University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejope since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. In addition, we believe that it is important to acknowledge that sustainability is not just about the environment, but is also inextricably tied to social and economic factors and influences. This series will help to illuminate those facets of sustainability. We'd like to emphasize that this is a safe space. All opinions, feelings, experiences are welcome to be shared, and we encourage active participation in the discussion. Additionally, if you want to leave at any time, there are no obligations to stay the entire time. For today's panel, we have two great guest speakers, Danielle Yancey and Chef Elena Terry. Each panelist will present for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we will have them answer some pre-selected questions during a roundtable discussion. And finally, we will allow questions from the audience. Feel free to leave questions in the chat box, and we will have someone monitoring it. So to begin, we have Danielle. Danielle is the director of the Native American Center for Health Professions through the UW-Madison School of Medicine and Public Health. I'll let her introduce herself and share any information that she'd like.
Thank you. Poso ane maunibiak mashiknetanawi makana. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Grace, for that introduction and for that land acknowledgement. I just want to again say Wawanin for inviting me to this space and an important conversation about sustainability and Indigenous activism. A little bit about myself. I come from the Menominee and Santee Dakota Sioux people. I grew up on the Menominee Indian Reservation in north central Wisconsin. I'm also a Badger, so I attended school here. I did my undergraduate degree in social welfare and women's studies. I also did my master's degree here in urban and regional planning with a focus on social welfare and environmental equity. And then I also did a sustainability leadership certificate at Edgewood College. So sustainability has always been an important topic to me. I also was a Chancellor Scholar, so shout out to all the other Marcel J. Lee scholars out there, which helped make my journey here at UW possible. So currently I serve as the director at the Native American Center for Health Professions, which we call NATIP for short. Our mission at the center is to increase the representation of Native Americans in the health professions, and our vision is to improve the health and well-being of American Indian, Alaska Native people in our communities. So I feel very fortunate to be able to do that work because it's really important as we think about health parity for all people, especially going through this current pandemic, we see just how important access to healthcare, social determinants of health, and all of those things are for our well-being and our health. Outside of my role at NACHIP, I also was fortunate to collaborate with a dear friend of mine, Kelly Jackson. We have a nonprofit organization called Spirit of a Woman, which is has a focus on uplifting Indigenous girls and women through music and community building. One of our youth programs is Indigenous Girls Rock Camp, which is a global Girls Rock Camp Alliance. And we were fortunate to have the mentorship of the Madison Girls Rock Camp to help us get a program like this started here. And really just around bringing our young girls together here in the Dane County region and just kind of rock out on some music and, using that as an avenue to, for, our young girls to express themselves, to build community and positive peer support. So that's been a really exciting part of other work that I get to do outside of my role at NACHIP. And then the most important job that I have is that of being a mother. So I have 4 children, and my bigs and my littles. So I have a son who's out in Nashville working, a daughter who just started college, and then I have this 2nd and 3rd graders. So they keep me all really busy. Talk about sustainability. How do I sustain myself each day to do all of those things? But just really happy to be here and look forward to talking a bit more.
Yes, thank you so much, Danielle. We have a few questions for you before we do our introduction for Elena. Our first question is, can you talk about your work with Spirit of a Woman and a favorite memory that you have while founding this program?
Oh gosh. So I shared a little bit about the mission of Spirit of a Woman, and I think what was a very pivotal memory in getting that established is my work at the Department of Transportation. I was a tribal liaison. That's where Kelly and I met each other, and we spent a lot of time on the road. And having those, having that space to just talk about all of the life experiences that impact us as Indigenous women, we have a lot in common. And from that experience, we did a women's retreat and just had a space just for, our circle of Indigenous women who are, close to us, helped us through different moments in our lives. And it was really impactful in recognizing that, these spaces are important. It's, restoration, it's support, it's community building, it's a space for us. And so, we wanted to kind of grow that circle and do, and try to do more programming outside of that. Trying to do that, we're working full time is a challenge. So, you always have a bigger vision than what you can actually do sometimes. But from that is where the Indigenous Girls Rock Camp came out. And so it's definitely been a fun journey so far.
Yes, thank you. A second question, can you speak to some of the barriers you've encountered while trying to promote health professions for Indigenous people?
Oh, wow, that's a really big question. It could be a seminar in and of itself. I think what's really important for the work that we do is starting these conversations as early as possible. We try to get the word out about, opportunities to continue your education, to learn about different health professions, and to have those representations for our youth to see that, these pathways, these careers in health are possible. And there's a way to do that with the community of other Indigenous healers and support, that you don't have to do this alone. And I think that's one of the powerful things about, Dr. Broad's vision, who's the founder of NACHIP, is to build a community of Native healers and to kind of create a hub where young people who want to access a career in health have that support system. They know how to access those pathways. They sometimes feel very distant and, can feel a little mysterious of like, how do you even become a doctor? It just feels so far away. So we try to make that dream more tangible and to show that there's a mechanism to do that and make it happen. And also just showing that there are Indigenous people that are in these roles. That representation is really important, and Dr. Bro founded We Are Healers. So for those of you listening in, go seek that out. They're just powerful stories of individuals for our communities who have realized those dreams of becoming a healer in their community, and that everybody can have their own individual journey of how they got there. So no matter where you're starting from, you can get there. And I think it's very empowering and inspiring to see that.
Thank you. A follow-up question to that. How can the University of Wisconsin-Madison community better support your work?
Wow, another really big question. You know, there's so many things that can be done, both big and small. I think people just having an awareness that there are programs like this and, you know, how they can support them, sustain them, continue to invest in them, I think is really important. Because having the people and the funding to be able to do this work is vital for everything that we're able to do. So I think that's always a really good starting point. What's been really great to see as well is just the student and staff and faculty community on campus continue to grow. And so I would just say more of that, you know, building that community, people who have the expertise and the knowledge to do this kind of work is really important. So, you know, the hiring, the recruitment, the acceptance, you know, scholarships, all of that is, you know, it's a holistic approach to supporting this work that I would love to see continue and grow.
Yes, thank you very much, Danielle. Now we'll move on to our second panelist and do a quick introduction and some questions before we open it up to additional questions. So our second panelist for today is Elena Terry. Elena is the executive chef and founder of Wild Bearies, a nonprofit organization that works to bring ancestral Indigenous foods to communities. I'll let you introduce yourself for the rest of it.
All right, well, thank you for that, Ken, and thank you for having me. I am the executive chef and founder of Wild Bearies. Wild Bearies is something that I like to think of as kind of manifested itself, and I'm just along enjoying the ride and getting to meet incredible people and share stories, really healing our community. And I like to say that, like, I'm one of the first ones. It's for people overcoming alcohol and other drug abuse issues or emotional traumas, and using food as a vessel to reconnect to our community from these disconnects that we all have to suffer through life, and making that transition a little bit easier without judgment and oversharing an incredible meal. I also have partnerships here with the UW and working, encouraging, building community and educating and providing delicious meals through the Wild Bearies to a lot of, pre-COVID, a lot more, but we still are doing stuff with like the Native American Student Association and stuff, just to encourage the space that our students and of all races share here, and saying that, you know, it's important to do that work for yourself and your education. I have, I work with the American Indian Foods Program as well to encourage individual or tribal entrepreneurs and producers and getting their food and product out into our communities on a much larger level, and showing how to represent those ingredients or products in ways that are well received. And then I also am Chef Elena Terry, which kind of helps fund all of it. And I have really believed in the power of mentoring, and how that just, when we look at our food system holistically, that everybody has a part where they feel connected into our food system. And if anything, we all do eat. And so we have a space, and it's how we choose to work towards making that more accessible, healthier, and doing that in a way that connects us to the land, that educates in a way that we're able to dictate the narrative and building community on not just our families and our tribal areas, but the communities that we live in, the greater communities. So yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So now we'll do some follow-up questions. What do you find most meaningful in your work through Wild Bearies and other Indigenous food justice organizations?
I think that it is this connection that we're able to make with each other, but not just with each other, with the plants and the animals that we use, or the other communities that we're able to go. And, you know, it's the intentions that we're setting in place now, and knowing that we have the knowledge that we do today and the relationships because our ancestors put those intentions into motion thousands of years ago, you know, and now we're able to sit amongst each other and share what we have left and reclaim spaces and stories and food systems that, you know, in some ways you might associate that with the struggles and the trauma that we've had to face as people. And in other ways you can look at it as, you know, we have these foods because of resilience and strength, and nobody wants to have to acknowledge how much you have to endure, but it's when you stop and actually say, like, I come from warriors and I come from strength and power, it helps start that healing intention for the next generation. So for me, I think the most rewarding part is knowing that every small ripple I can put into motion today will ensure that my great-grandchildren will have what I have, and hopefully more.
Thank you. Another question, can you talk a little bit about your work through the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance?
Sure. So with the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, I began this kind of merging of my two lives, because I worked in restaurants for quite some time. Before that, I was a tribal politician. I was an advocate in the school districts and a foster parent. And one day, kind of walked away from it all and went back to work in restaurants. Like, I love it. I loved everything about it. And for me, it was a space where no matter what, I could thrive. At the end of the day, I could go home. And but I was still living in two worlds. I was living in this very Western world of, you know, restaurant life. And then I was raised in a very traditional family. And when I cooked for ceremonies, there was such a amplified space of peace and healing, like just within me in prayer and thoughtfulness. And I was thinking, you know, I just need to trust this and put the two of them together and say that if I cook our foods the way that I was taught to cook them and honoring them in that way, that I would be able to share that healing and that connection. And so the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance had a pilot mentorship program, and I had applied for it as a mentee because I thought, like, no matter how old or how much knowledge I have, I would like to see where everybody's at and just be able to take in as much as I could. And after that first experience, my good friend Tanya Brandt and I went to every food summit that year together, and we went just to work in the kitchens and learn from everybody. And at the end of that year, I was thinking, not only did Wild Bearies kind of get in motion a little bit more, but I was thinking that this had affected me so deeply, and the support that I had received from everybody that I had met along the way at those food summits had just really given me the space to know that this was a journey worth pursuing. So I advocated for that with the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, and they dedicated a food and culinary program, which includes the food and culinary mentorship, which is around 130 throughout the Americas of different level chefs, from home cooks to James Beard award winners. And it's really about building a community and, like, saying, I see you. And there's a different level that you might need to have to be from a really good cook to a chef. and I will help you get to that space if that's what you want. So it's been very rewarding being a part of it. I did step aside from being the culinary coordinator to being a contributing mentor because I felt in doing that I was just showing again that, you know, there's always space for the next generation, and I would gladly step aside to let the next person come ahead, because that's the only way we're going to make progress in this world.
Thank you so much. A follow-up question to that, how can we all as individuals support this initiative?
I think just small acts of kindness. You know, it is about saying that another universal is we are not perfect and everybody stumbles. That's what life's about. And it's getting up and learning the lessons you need to learn and sharing those teachings from those lessons. And so, you know, for me, if I can share this story and share these connections that I've made and, you know, leading by example, then hopefully I will be able to help the next generation that is up and coming. You know, we have a wonderful group of students here on campus that are doing incredible things with agriculture, and I've gone and hand planted corn with them just to say, like, I see what you're doing. If that continues, like, if your passion and your, you know, drive to learn more and to retain and share that knowledge, then, you know, continue doing that and doing it in a good way. And sometimes that is just offering somebody to be included in your activities. It's small things that make a huge difference in that.
We have one more question for you. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of seasonality of foods? And then a follow-up question, what is your favorite food from each season?
Oh my goodness, yes, of course. I mean, one of the things that I was taught is that in using these foods from harvest, however they are, if it's hunting or foraging or cultivating, which are all seasonal, you know, activities, that it's when you accept those gifts, that it's that plant or that animal giving itself to you to fulfill its destiny, to nourish you in a way. And I think when you start looking at any food in any season that way, like, you want the freshest ingredients, you know, the best possible. We're going into hunting season, so we are, you know, going to be preserving a lot of meat in different ways, and it's kind of a good time because it's cold. And of course, I'm a butcher, so I appreciate this time. I don't hunt at all, but I will go and help process anything in your house. And you know, from there you get into these really cold months where you use a lot of your preserved foods, but then there's this beautiful gift at the end of winter, and it's like maple season comes. And for us, you know, that everything about that, from the initial sap that comes out is medicine, and there's this life from the tree that it's giving you, and it's like waking everything up. And so you can't, I mean, maple is a given. Coming into spring, you have these beautiful plants like milkweed and fern and morels. You get this fungus that pops out. It's also fresh and bright, I guess, because it all seems to be waking up. And then you start your cultivation. And anybody that's ever known anything about me at all knows that I love squash. Squash. Very underappreciated. I encourage everybody to try it. Yeah. But there's so much you can do with squash. And I think at the end of, like, right now, just coming out of harvest and being able to see, like, these incredible things that people are producing, and the way these plants are showing up in gardens, anything that somebody has put their care into growing is incredible. You know, it's hard to say anything other than that when it comes to, like, the harvest time. But I mean, definitely squash is my, like, all-time favorite ingredient. But I mean, like, wild rice, maple, they're all so incredible. Yeah, I'm hungry now. I'm like fantasizing so.
I guess I would love to know just what your favorite dish is to make with or without squash. But
My favorite dish, I have a dish called Sasquatch, which I actually premiered at the Food Sovereignty Summit that I went to as a mentee. And they were saying for this Taste of the Tribes Day, everybody showcases something from their own area. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll make a traditional soup. And I did, I made milkweed soup. But then I was thinking, I want to like highlight these ingredients that are from my area that people might not realize. And so I used a walnut crust with some maple, and then it was a squash custard similar to like a pumpkin pie, but it was a little bit squashier than a pumpkin, might be a little bit sweeter. And then wild cranberry drizzle on top with some apple dust, and that was that is my favorite still. It's like all these things that I love from home, and like this wonderful Sasquatch.
that sounds amazing. Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
Yes, and I have to attest to her like recipe and cooking skills. We had the honor of hosting Elena in facilitating a virtual traditional foods workshop. So our students were able to do that. We had to get creative of how can we still bring traditional foods into our programming, because that's a big part of health too, is you know, that connection to our traditional foodways. And so we were so honored to have Elena teach us how to cook some squash. We had some potatoes, wild rice. I remember that drizzle, it was so good.
I do too. But there is a lot that ties in there, and these are the relationships that we talk about that are, it's building community in more than one space, and it's realizing the impact of what we do in putting it together and how much more progress we can make, and not only educating but sharing those memories, those meals, and like those good feelings, and a path to healing more than just physically. You know? It's great. I'm glad that I'm able to help and to be invited to the table.
Thank you both for sharing. I think we have some questions in the audience right off the bat.
Yeah, Danielle, I was wondering how your individual identity shapes the way that you approach science and health.
Oh, wow. Everything. I mean, it's, you know, so much of what I do is informed by, that's my worldview. You know, I don't know how to separate the two. So, and I'm very lucky that in the work that I do at NACHIP, that I'm a part of a team. There's, you know, 4 other members of our core team, and we, you know, some of us are part of the same tribe, some of us are from different tribes, and our students that we serve are from different tribes. So we're a diverse community within our community, and so it's nice to be able to like have that space where we can all share our experiences and think about our work where we can indigenize what we do, because that in spaces like this on a predominantly white campus, it's not the case in all settings. So how can we, you know, incorporate traditional foodways into our learning, open up travel clinical rotations for our students, you know, and thinking about our curriculum, and not just for our students, but for all students, that they learn about our communities here. So I think it's been the center point of where I think about what we do, and even my own experiences as an alumni here from UW is to be on the other side of that experience, trying to support students. Is you're always thinking about the next generations. You're thinking about who comes after us and how can we, you know, make this space a little better than it was when I came here.
Yeah, I kind of have a follow-up question sort of similar to that. You just talked about the We Are Healers group, and that sounded super interesting. I was wondering if you could just talk about like the importance of having like Native healers present and in the community, and like why that is just so like incredibly important for Native individuals.
Yeah, so We Are Healers was founded by Dr. Eric Bro, who's our founding director at NACHIP. And so this was like the beautiful brainchild of his was, you know, we don't see the representation of Native health professionals in a lot of health settings. I grew up on my reservation, and I don't think I met a Native doctor until I started working with NACHIP. And I didn't even realize that it was such an uncommon thing. And so, you know, when thinking about this work of how do you inspire and support the next generation of healers, that representation was like, how can you make that connection between, hey, there's this whole community of people who are doing this work, and for our young people to see that. And so that's where We Are Healers kind of came into the fold. And so the program series itself, there are many video vignettes that feature different Native health professionals, featuring physicians, nurses. He continues to do the series as a national nonprofit organization, so individuals working in public health, and they all just share their journey of what inspired them about wanting to go into health, how did they get there. I think a lot of people that are featured in that talk about how going into health doesn't mean leaving your Native identity behind. It's actually an asset. It's, you know, so important in why we need more Native people in the health field in all areas. So it was just a creative way to sort of bring these stories to people wherever they are. And I've talked to a lot of students who even watch them as they're, you know, having it's tough exam time. And I just need a little bit of inspiration or a little bit of motivation and encouragement, and say that they'll go and they'll watch one of those videos and, you know, get that as kind of like good medicine for, you know, like I can do this. There are people that are reading for me. And then at our center, I think what's been really cool about having a NACHIP here is that it's become a community builder. So there are Native physicians, Native nurses, Native pharmacists all across Wisconsin and our region. And so we, when NACHIP was established, created an advisory council. So it's been a way to connect these Native providers together, and now, you know, our mentors, and you know, also do different educational workshops, sharing their experiences, hosting students for clinical rotations. So it's a very long-winded answer to say that it's important in so many ways, and has been a catalyst to really support our students that want to work in that area.
Yeah, thank you. That was super helpful to know more about that.
Yes, and you can find the videos online at wearehealers.org. We also have wearehealers.wis.edu on our NACHIP website that feature providers from our region here, including Dr. Brett Benally-Thompson. A shout out to him, who's our faculty director and advisor at NACHIP.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll definitely use those. Those sound like awesome resources.
Thank you for sharing them.
Do we have any questions in the chat at all?
We do not yet, no.
Then I will ask you all a question. We'll answer in whatever order you would like. For both of you, what does sustainability mean in the context of Indigenous communities and activism? I know another big question.
Yeah. I mean, for me, sustainability means in part a reclamation of what has been taken, you know, and bringing that back to the community and sharing it in a way that it will be received well enough. You know, we are coming into this age where there is so much more information being shared about what is really going on in our communities, you know, in the Americas. And you think of boarding schools and you hear boarding schools and you see these, in my mind, black and white pictures, but my mother was a boarding school survivor and all these children that were lost. And I don't like to use the word trauma, but I feel like in certain instances, it really needs to be acknowledged that that was something imposed on our people and that it wasn't something that we gave away. It was something that was like very forcefully taken from us. So in order to sustain, we have to reclaim and we have to do what we can to share the knowledge that we have amongst each other without, in ways that are responsible for us, because in part the only way we have that knowledge is because it was so highly protected. But we have to be responsible and say, I want the next generation to have more and to have better. And I want to recognize that those traumas did happen. And in some ways, I know Danielle said she's a mother, I'm a mother. You take those pains so that the next generation doesn't have to. So how can we honor those pains that, our ancestors took and say that we will do more to learn, that we will do more to be stronger and stand in solidarity and to push the next generation forward and to show them leading by, incredible examples, like being able to sit at the same table with people that are making change and saying, we will continue so that the next generation will see they must continue. And because those, it goes back to those intentions that our grandparents and our great ancestors set in place was so that we would continue to have that. And we must make that action and recognize that that's our space right now today. No matter how old we are, that those actions need to start going into motion, and they have been. And it's beautiful to watch.
I just don't know everything she said. In fact, I was just so wrapped up in listening to what Elena was saying, because I'm like, yes, in my head, that I don't even remember what the question was either. But I absolutely agree with everything that you said, Elena.
We do have one question from the chat. So the question is, what encourages you or gives you hope about the future of Indigenous communities?
I can say that recently somebody said to me, providing space for excellence amongst excellence makes people reach for that. And seeing people like Danielle step up and say, I am going to stay in this place so that people see me here, so that people know this is attainable and I will help you get there. Like that is for me, giving them space to be whatever it is that they need to be the next generation. I think showing that you can heal, that life isn't about ego, that there's a lot of peace in the forest and simple things. And I think right now in this moment, as we're sitting in a small group with masks on, enjoying each other's conversation, we realize that change needs to happen. And what can we do to initiate that in the next generation? And what can we do to make it a safer, stronger space for them to thrive?
Yeah, another excellent. Those are just like such, important things. And I love what you said about, just like the excellence around us. And it's just so awesome when you see people who are doing such important and like impacting things in our communities and spaces. And, when I came to UW over 20 years ago, there's nowhere near the number of programs here now that have an Indigenous focus, that have the kind of spaces that are here now. And it's, all of those efforts, whether big or small, that they just keep moving forward. I think that's what's helpful, and is because we are still here. And, you know, the people who came before us, like we stand, you know, there's a saying that we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. And so we have to keep pushing forward for those who come after us. And that is like, I'm so thankful that that is just a part of our identity, that we've been taught that we've been taught that principle of the 7 generations, and you know, and that's what continues to, you know, inspire us all to keep just doing what we can in our, you know, corners of our spaces, you know, and to be able to do that together is really exciting and important.
Thank you very much.
Elena, I was curious, you said that you've been helping with some work in expanding Indigenous food markets. And I was just curious how us as individual consumers could get access to local Indigenous foods.
There's a lot of websites available now where there's local producers and small, even individual producers that are going into larger hubs for distribution. So I know like Tokabe just started distributing some Indigenous ingredients that are going there from smaller producers. That's what the American Indian Foods Program does as well. And I believe there's a Great Lakes Co-op in the works. But it is about, I think, driving down the road and seeing a local selling hand-harvested wild rice and stopping and supporting that. You know, it's these random spaces where there might be somebody on whatever level, if it's Indigenous or if it's a local grower or whatever, in saying that I economically will support you and help this part of the food system get a little stronger, you know, where we have a little bit more voice in what we are able to consume because they will produce it for us. And right now we are in this big shift because for me, I can't just go to the store and buy what I need. Like I need to have thought, foresight for a while to be able to have things grown and anticipate environmental disasters that can happen along the way, you know. So sometimes there is a uneven market, and if you talk about sustainability right now, for example, our wild rice market is like through the roof because of the pipeline and the things that are happening in Minnesota, North Minnesota, with the lakes and the fresh water, and the trickle-down effect has really, you know, impacted our local communities when it comes to such a substantial food source. So it might even be something like that if you want to support, you know, having your voice be heard to change the flow of what you feel as the next generation is important, and in saying that these things have to be addressed, you know, like I do want wild rice to continue, so I will have to talk more about water and conservation and even recognizing that those are practices that still exist today.
We kind of asked the question of what gives you hope, but I'd like to ask what else would you like to see, what else would give you hope, specifically from the UW-Madison, UW system, state government, and federal government in regards to their relationships with Indigenous communities and what they're doing to support them.
I can say, for example, it does make my heart feel good to hear a land acknowledgement, you know, prior to this, so thank you for that. But it is also a firm reminder that, you know, we are on land that once was my ancestors' home, and you know, it's not something that we would ever be able to reclaim on that level. So what would give me hope would be to continue seeing, you know, faces like yours acknowledging that shifts need to happen, not just for Indigenous peoples to continue on, but for all people to continue on. And how can we make the world a little more gentle, a little bit more in tune, and, you know, honor those energies that were given to us so that we even have this space now today, you know. So what gives me hope is the conversation continues and then is followed by action.
Yeah, I echo that. I think what anybody can do is just listen to Indigenous voices and, you know, create space for those voices to be heard and to not do it in gesture only, but to do it in a real meaningful way, and a way that also honors tribal sovereignty and, you know, acknowledging, you know, that as a community, we, you know, we're part of the BIPOC community. We're also political entities, you know, that tribal governments who have, you know, their land, their resources, their jurisdictions, you know, around things like protecting waterways. You know, tribes are very active in Wisconsin and, you know, make recommendations to the state and to the federal government of like, this is what we want to see protected. So then how do we support that? How do we really truly listen to those Indigenous voices and then act on that? So, you know, I think we all have a personal sense of agency in ways that we could do that.
Thank you both.
I'm curious, what's one lesson that both of you have learned from the pandemic? It can be in your work or your personal life.
To unmute. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know if I've learned that.
I don't think I fully mastered that. It still happens now. I mean, all joking aside, I think, you know, taking more of a personal perspective on this is that it definitely maybe just like take perspective, like a different kind of perspective on things. You know, we talk a lot about, especially in the health world, we would talk a lot about, you know, how so many different things affect health, and we need to do something about that, and the environment affects our health. And I think during this pandemic, we really saw that on individual, community, and macro levels, that is very real. You know, in the work that any of us do, we would be so caught up in the day-to-day, running from here, running to there, and it was like almost like everything came to a stop. And, you know, it was, there were a lot of things that happened over the past 18 months that just, you know, again, caused a lot of perspective taking, a lot of reflection, and, you know, a lot of just thinking about how can we do better? What did we learn from this time? And just, you know, keeping that at the forefront.
For me, I think it goes kind of along with that seasonality question. You know, there are things that we do throughout the year in ceremony, in community, that we weren't able to participate in. And it, like the purpose and the explanation and the teachings amongst that go along with that, even for funerals, we weren't able to mourn the way that we were supposed to, or we would, and that has purpose for healing, for, you know, everything has a meaning, everything has a reason, and we had to do that isolated without full, you know, being able to fully appreciate what those ceremonies are for. And I think that it made me personally realize how important it was to continue those authentically and to make sure that, you know, my children understand why and the importance of it. And I think more than anything, I felt it in like my heart and how much I missed participating and being there. But ultimately, out of respect for the elders and these knowledge keepers, we, you know, respected these guidelines and didn't do that. And I can say now that we're going back to being able to have some of those ceremonies on certain levels, it is a sense of grounding that can't be replaced. And it definitely was felt like how much I missed having it, but how much I appreciate it in my life every day, and what you need to do in whatever way to continue self-care during times like this, you know, and connections and those teachings that we have that, you know, have helped us endure and survive for so long.
Thank you, guys. We do have a question from the chat for Danielle. So it's just asking, what was your experience like as an Indigenous student when you were here at UW? And has the relationship between the university and Indigenous communities changed much since then?
Wow. So what was my experience like and how has it changed?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my experience when I first came down here was, in all honesty, it was pretty challenging. You know, I grew up on the reservation where everyone was Menominee, and then I came down here and I'm like, where are the Menominees at? I was the only, you know, there's like maybe a couple of us, and that was just hugely different. Like it was a culture shock for sure, and it really took me a long time to kind of find my place where I felt like I belonged here on campus. And you know, there weren't as many programs like there are now, so it's great to see that the systems of support for students have grown. There's still always room for growth, continued growth in those areas. But, you know, back in the day, 20 years ago, you know, when I was here on campus, I didn't learn that the university is on Ho-Chunk land. That wasn't even a part of our discourse as a campus community. And so that now more and more people know that history is so important, but even beyond that, then what do we do about that? How do we honor that? How does that just become a part of our ethic here as a campus? So that's been a huge shift. And, you know, as I reflect back, you know, I try to, you know, think about my own experience as a student and how can I sort of channel that and into the work that I do, not to, you know, center my own experience in that, but just trying to create a community here on campus, because being away from your home community where you have access to your culture, your language, your ceremonies, your traditions, and if those are the things that sustain you and help you through, and, you know, when you're trying to study hard and, you know, you're away from home and you're missing those things, how can we create those spaces here? So I feel like there's been, you know, some improvement, but like I said, there's always still room to grow, to make things better.
Thank you very much. And you kind of touched on it a little bit on how the university can kind of improve those relationships. Is there anything else that you think that like you would like to see the university doing, whether it's with students, faculty, or staff, or anything like that?
Well, one thing that is happening right now that I would like to see, you know, sustained longer term is, you know, there's our shared future, which is an acknowledgement about the campus's history as Ho-Chunk land, and turning that into a way to support educational opportunities that extend that history and learning to all students, staff, and faculty. So sustaining opportunities like that. There's also the Native Nations Working Group that was established a few years back that is acknowledging tribal sovereignty and working in partnership with all of our Native nations in the state, and just to see that continue to get supported and sustained, because it's creating like an actual mechanism to have conversations about, you know, what are the priorities of our communities, what's here as a university that might align with that, where our points of mutual interest where we can work together, and having an actual mechanism to make those connections is really important. I hope that you know, continues, because it really is the Wisconsin idea, you know, in action, is thinking outside of the borders of our campus. So I think it's a good start, and, you know, I hope it continues to grow and build capacity.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so as well. And then another question from the chat from Tim for Elena. He says he just had a wonderful butternut squash risotto, and he wants to know what your favorite thing to do with squash is. So.
Well, we just did like a squash pudding with a candied squash. Like I really like squash being sweet and kind of honoring like that natural flavor that comes out, but then you can also add it to like a soup with some nutmeg and completely change the soup because of it. I don't know how much time does he have.
I'm gonna say these all
But I
sound
have
wonderful.
it on squash risotto and it's really good, savory. I think my all-time favorite thing that I have done with it is this like nettle ramp pasta and stuffed with like creamy whipped squash and like a small quail egg, and then it's like with morel sauce. That was probably one of the best bites I've ever had.
That does sound wonderful. We're good on questions from the chat as well.
And we are at time, so we'd like to thank you both for joining us today, for sharing so much with us. If either one of you has any closing remarks, anything you'd like to say before we finish here, feel free to share with us.
Just thank you for inviting me to the table, and if anybody ever sees me out and about, I absolutely love talking about food. I'll talk about food all the time, anytime. So, and I love having conversations about sustainability and the work we do, and really supporting, the next generation. So always welcome the conversation. Thank you, and thank you for sharing with me.
Yes, I echo the same. Just a big well and to all of you for inviting us and also creating space for me to meet Elena in person because we've had a chance to work together virtually, and just it was really wonderful to share space with you this evening. And just for some parting words is, for those tuning in, I encourage you to take what you've learned and continue that learning. It's an individual journey, and wherever you do have the opportunity to support, whether that's a business or, maybe there's a policy recommendation that's out there, there are ways that you can activate and, be part of the conversation and to convert that into some kind of form of action or support.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.